Bum, 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 bum.
You're listening to Tove, a podcast about the good place and Jewish ideas. Hi, I'm John Spira-Savett, and here again with me is Dan Ross.
Hi, everybody.
Two rabbis here again to talk about episode 2 of The Good Place, which is called Flying. I wanted to start off, I was listening to our recording of our first conversation and some negative points on me because we talked about this whole episode without my actually mentioning the people who created that episode in The Good Place. So I wanted to just talk about them. Michael Schur, who's the creator of the show, and the incredible cast. We talked particularly about Ted Danson and Kristen Bell. William Jackson Harper plays Chidi. Also Darcy Carden and Jamila Jamil and Manny Jacinto. I think we got all the main cast there. Just amazing. And in this episode, I'm really going to go loving William Jackson Harper as Chidi. So anyway, some negative points I got to work off. And I want to say something positive about you, Dan, because I was listening to, we were talking about what characters we kind of think we're most like or strive like. And you described Eleanor, and I'm not sure I heard it as you were saying it before, but just kind of described her as being almost like the ideal rabbi. You were talking about her organizing a team to, do good for themselves and the world. And I thought, wow. And then I also thought, wouldn't that be amazing if like rabbinical school was being taught by Eleanors instead of Chidis?
It's so interesting that you bring that up because I'm reminded as you say that of keeping the faith. The quote is like, no rabbi can ever, lead everyone, but they can only offer themselves as a guide to other helpless people or something like that. And I think that there's something to that about, Eleanor owning her own, especially as we enter the season of Elul and the high holidays, like Eleanor owning where she needs to grow. And by the way, as you were giving your first al hate, like the sin that you committed, I'm like, Elul started next week. It's great. So like, let's just let's get it started early, John, and as we think about our sins of the past year.
Absolutely. And this is not a coincidence. If you're listening to this as it's brand new, it is planned to begin for Elul, the month that's leading to Rosh Hashanah. But this is good stuff for all year long, too. Do you want to give us the summary, Dan?
Yeah, sure. So let's find out what happens in this wondrous episode called Flying. Michael convenes the neighborhood meeting, which was called at the end of the previous episode, at Tahani's house and says there must be a flaw of some kind, but everyone's striped clothing begins to turn back to normal and the crisis is apparently averted. Back to Eleanor's house, Chidi puts up a blackboard with a bunch of questions from moral philosophy related to whether he should help Eleanor, but he tells her it is impossible because she is too selfish to ever be a good person. Eleanor flashes back to going out to drinks with her coworkers and discussing who should be the designated driver. And instead of her letting her name be drawn out of the hat, she eats all of the slips of paper and says, "This is what integrity looks like." On Flying Day, Tahani proposes that some should stay back and do a neighborhood cleanup, and Chidi volunteers himself and Eleanor. Eleanor does it half-heartedly, and eventually when a trash bag breaks, she hides it in one of those homes so that she can have a turn at flying. Just after she gets into the air, trash begins to fall from the sky. Chidi suspects it's Eleanor's fault, and she confesses, and Chidi tells her it is pointless to try to help her. Michael talks to Tahani and Jian Yu about being a bad architect, a canyon full of poo-poo. That night, Eleanor flashes back again to the bar, where after wiggling out of being a designated driver again, her colleagues tell her, "You have a very important choice to make." Eleanor goes out and cleans up the neighborhood by herself, and Chidi sees her and says he will help her. He starts their course in moral philosophy, but a note is slipped under Eleanor's door that says, "Dun dun dun, you don't belong here."
Nicely
Who
done.
sent that note, John? I guess we'll find out in the next episode.
I guess we will find that out. Wow. So that's great. I have, people have told me sometimes that I have like a radio voice. Boy, I'm like demonstrating that I don't now. And you went full drama instead of radio announcer. So do you have some things that you love about this episode?
I love just like my favorite line in the episode is when Michael says, "I've banned flying for 1,000 years." And the reason for that is like it's such a throwaway line. It's so funny, but it gives you the scope. It's like the first time you like, for me at least, I really realized, wow, we're talking about eternity here. Like these folks are going to be here for eternity. And there's even a question of like whether they can fly once every 1,000 years because it's too dangerous. It's like, why is it too dangerous? There's also the wonderful moment where he kicks the dog into the sun, which is just so, and it got me to thinking a little bit about like, is there anybody in the neighborhood who doesn't like dogs? I'm a dog lover, John. I love my dog, but would it be the case that you couldn't have even one dog in a neighborhood of people that don't like dogs? That sort of thing. It's like kind of like questions that were popping into my head. But I love, I mean, again, this is just another classic episode, of course. What about you?
I love kind of this scene toward the opening where with the blackboard and where Chidi is trying to describe how he's going to approach this question about whether to help her or not. And after he presents some of the philosophical questions, he tries to, he says to her, like, can you tell me one thing about me, like where I'm from? And she says, is it racist if I say Africa? And the way they play that, whole thing out, like the lines are so, like it's a lot of this kind of basic stuff that Chidi delivers as like straight philosophy, but they play it for like the extra thing for a laugh, and he's like both like yes and also Africa's not a country, and just it's just really clever. They give it like just enough. Like I feel like the episode isn't like overdone for like yuck laughs, but it's got great stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I think really, I was just kind of, and I love the thing about where she says where it's from is Sensodyne instead of Senegal.
Oh, Sensodyne, that was a good one. And then the other like just incredible moment is Tahani and Janyu, when Tahani says to him, because Janyu's still in his vow of silence, she says to him, "Well, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Why don't we both say it at exactly the same time?" And then she says it, and he doesn't speak, of course. And it's just such a classic moment. It's like, you sly dog, you had me going there for a second. So, oh man. And it gets you wondering again, like, when Michael says things like 1,000 years, like, why would is it imaginable that like somebody could actually keep a vow of silence for all of eternity in the world, in the good place? I guess. Yeah. Anyways, all right.
No, but I was going to ask you, like, what kind of toothpaste do you use, if I might ask you a personal question?
Crest Extra Whitening. Those big packages you can get from Costco. Uh-huh. Like I think we bought one like 2 or 3 years ago, and we still haven't finished it. You can get like 5 or 6 wrapped together. So, love getting stuff like that from Costco. What about you? What's your toothpaste?
You know what? I was, as soon as I thought about asking you this, I realized that I should check, because I'm not sure if it's Crest or Colgate, or if I just use whatever happens to be there. I know.
So you don't have a strong toothpaste preference, but it's not Sensodyne.
No, but I am more for the white toothpaste than for the gels.
Definitely.
Again, not a strong.
Yeah,
preference.
Anything that's like electric blue like that, I'm very hesitant to put on my teeth. It's just a little bit it's a bit concerning. So
the other thing, I think also like my favorite line that I didn't remember was at the initial scene at the meeting at Tahani's, where actually first Michael reveals that he's like in a human body that he's created for himself, and he's sweating, which he has to have Janet explain what sweating is and what to do about it. He's like, should I lick it? And she says, no, dab it with a cloth. And then he says, and then should I lick that? And that was really awesome.
Oh man,
goodness. Yeah, and I was really just marveling at how some of these money lines of these the big questions, particularly Chidi gets to deliver them, and they sort of make sense. Either they're funny or just the way he sells it with earnestness coupled with this like exasperation. It's just brilliant. And they don't like hit us over the head with the philosophy, which is totally what I think we're going to do, and hopefully try to make it funny there. So, but actually what I thought we could do is to jump in, and this will actually help us talk about some of these things in the episode, and mention a couple of Jewish ideas and texts. And I wanted to start with just the idea of teshuvah, which is the big idea really of the whole show. Teshuvah, I'm just going to say, is like this idea of personal, I'm going to say, self-correction. That'll be like a stand-in thing till we explain this term. But I think actually the show is brilliant. It's just an over and over exploration. That's actually why I wanted to do the podcast, is I think it's just this incredible exploration of some of these basic ideas, like over and over again. We'll keep coming back to them. So I'll be like, hopefully like only 45 seconds of didactic, that I think it's neat to use Jewish terms and to explore them because they're different from what we hear. Like teshuvah is usually translated as repentance. We talk about repentance and sin, and I just don't think like those words are the same. And teshuvah is different from like growth or change. And so having this different kind of words to use and then to be able to use them gives us kind of a different angle on maybe what's a similar thing that we talk about in secular society or in American society. So teshuvah, it literally means coming back. I think actually it's kind of a hopeful metaphor because it suggests that you've been someplace good, or you've been someone good before. And it's an idea that in the Torah is actually rooted in exile of the people, going away and then actually literally coming home. And then it gets translated later in Jewish thought as something that happens individually. Do you want to say something any more general, Dan, about teshuvah before I give us a little quote about it?
One of the things is that I'm thinking about is like the show asks the question, can we get better? And its answer is emphatically like, yes, we can get better. And that's what I think about in the season of teshuvah. It's like that's the the heart of the question is like, is there a way that we can engage in the practice of self-improvement? Can we grow? Can we develop? Can we renew in its own way every single year? So, but awesome. And I love using this language to talk about the show. I love speaking in Jewish, as it were.
Yeah. And we'll see, again, to remind people that these lenses might or may not be useful or as useful or more useful than other lenses on personal growth or personal change, but it's a Jewish lens, and you'll get familiar with it. So I want to read this quote out from, again, Rabbi Moses Maimonides, medieval rabbi and philosopher, and he was like the least Chidi type of moral philosopher I can think of, like the least funny rabbi ever. So I'm trying to figure out how to do this without sort of sucking the air out of our conversation. It is the Talmud, I think, is like in many places legit funny, and as proof of this, and I'm going to post this, Dan Ross, sitting here himself, has done this like incredible thing with his our friend Dr. Daniel Olson, taking a whole chapter of Talmud and presenting it in this incredible, funny, and musical way. Yes, people will watch. And there's nothing about Rabbi Maimonides really that lends itself, I don't think, to being funny. But here we go. And so what I'm going to try to do also is to translate this text without in sort of a gender-neutral way and trying to avoid words like sin. So if you check out the show notes, you can go back and see if you want to hear it and sort of check my work and source it out. So here it is in what he calls Hilchot Teshuvah, the laws of Teshuvah, chapter 2, number 2. And he says, what is teshuvah? That a person who does wrong leaves the wrong and gets it out of one's mind and resolves in one's heart not to do it anymore. And then he quotes a verse from Isaiah, let the wicked give up his ways, the man of wrongdoing his plans, let him go back to Adonai, to God, this idea of coming back. And similarly, one must regret what one did wrong, as it is said, and he quotes Jeremiah, after I came back, I regretted. So the idea here, and again, we're going to talk like over and over throughout all these episodes about what teshuvah is, that it sort of starts with not doing and then changing your mind and then changing your heart. And so I think it's really interesting I was looking at this episode and looking at Eleanor in that light, and because I think Chidi is trying to figure out, like, is she, like, what is it with her? Does she just, initially it just seems like she wants to change just to like get out of she's up Shirts Creek, as they might say.
Oh, yeah. Another great show, as it were. A lot of Torah there. So if I understand your question, it's what is are we talking about what Eleanor's intentions are or what's her?
She starts off by, I mean, she knows that she has to change in some, she has to, I think her first idea is like, what can I do to keep myself in the good place? And that is where Maimonides starts with like, don't do something. And does that seem like a good place to start when one thinks about change?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's almost also like it's not even necessarily about keeping herself in the good places so much as it is about avoiding being sent to the bad place. And it really, sort of, if we're talking about moral development here, I mean, Chidi says from the very outset of their instruction, it's not even that you can't get better fundamentally because of that selfishness. Like even your intention for moral development is fundamentally selfish. And so how can I help you? You cannot achieve any meaningful moral development, perfection, whatever you want to call it, without actually having the right alignment of heart. So I think that this is definitely an incredibly. What are your thoughts? You chose to bring this text. So.
Yeah, I think partly because it doesn't really, like Maimonides doesn't start in the heart. That's kind of somewhere along the road. And I was thinking about how the show presents, like, what is Eleanor's badness? What do we know about her? We know that she is willing to like cheat, get old and vulnerable people to take a product which isn't good for them. And she's not willing to, drive people home, who might be drunk and, things like that. But we don't actually see her harm anybody. Like we see her do things that could lead people to harm. But it's interesting how they chose to characterize her badness. And then Chidi gives this label that it's about selfishness, thinking about only herself, and it causes her to do these flashbacks. But and they have to make her, I think, both she has to be for the show sort of bad enough, but also not so bad that we would just hate her. So I'm not sure. I think that what she starts, like, this is when he starts to talk to her, she thinks back, I think it's like 3 times in the episode, to the scene at the bar and the designated driver thing. And then I was thinking about, like, well, I don't know. I was going to say garbage, as like, there's a big theme in the first episode, and this one as kind of a metaphor. Oh, that's the other thing, right? She does. She steals shrimp from the party in episode 1. Right. She stuffs herself with that. But she is kind of, the first thing that happens is that Chidi comes up with this idea that why don't we participate in the cleanup of the neighborhood? So I guess that's like an action. It's not like fundamental, but it's just like a place to start. And I do like in Maimonides that he's very much like, we'll start by, in this teaching at least, start by thinking about something you're doing or you haven't done.
I guess that's true. And I think that, one of the things that, Chidi, one of the questions that we're going to probably circle around is the extent to which Chidi is an effective moral instructor, right? And so, he starts with the blackboard, but he also brings practice into Eleanor's moral education by raising the hand and explaining, he's like, this is precisely the kind of situation that you need to be put into in order to grow, which is like, there's something that you want to do, there's something that would benefit other people, and that you don't want to do, and which do you choose? Which is also just, you wonder a little bit about Tahani here too, and what's going on with Tahani and what she's trying to show by volunteering to clean up the neighborhood, right? Like why, or by, offering to volunteer to clean up the neighborhood. Like, again, we're in the good place, ostensibly, right? Like these folks should have nothing left to prove, or that should be the assumption that they're operating under. They should all get to fly. Like, who cares? But for whatever reason, Tahani is the kind of person who keeps studying for the SATs after getting into college, right? Like that's her yearbook superlative. I guess I'm sort of wondering, what's going on, or what might be going on there, and what questions that gives us to ask as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, because later on, and again, we said spoilers wouldn't be an issue here, we're going to find out that she has things she has to work on also. But at the moment, we just think that she's one of those many perfect people. I love it's what is it, Gunnar and Antonio? Is that their names? Who like love cleaning up and make a game out of it and shoot baskets, into the garbage cans. And she's like, yes, like clean up landmines, and I could clean up garbage here too. I think this relation of there's like two dimensions of mind, and maybe it's time for you to bring in your other thing, because it does, these conversations with Chidi do cause Eleanor to flash back and like process this one particular thing. And it's funny, I might have thought that cursing out the environmental petitioner at the supermarket, or defrauding people might be equivalently bad things, but they throw in this this bar scene thing, maybe because it has to do with people, like she's got people around who she knows. The other things are kind of less embedded, and here her thing is like in relation to.
I was also wondering how many months she had been going to that bar with her coworkers where they've realized that like her name never gets pulled out of the hat for for being the designated driver. It's like how many afternoon or Friday night happy hours do you have to go to in order to get that sense? Should I bring the second text we were talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a story from the Babylonian Talmud, which is the corpus of the rabbinic conversations about Jewish law, and it's from a tractate called Kiddushin, page 40b. And I love this scene with respect to the conversation that's had in the scene. And this is like classic Talmud, where they talk about rabbis sitting around talking to each other. So Rabbi Tarfon and the elders were once reclining in the upper story of Nietzsche's house in Lod when this question was posed to them. So just remember here, they're reclining. They're like lying down, doing their business, right? And the question is, which is greater, study or action? Rabbi Tarfon answers, action is greater. Rabbi Akiva, who is notably, one of the transcendent rabbis of all time, if not the most important, says study is greater. And all of the other folks sitting around say they agree with Akiva that study is greater than action because it leads to action. So it's very interesting. I just also just love that they're like kind of privileging the practice that they're engaged in at that very moment. It's like, what are we doing? We're sitting here studying. So of course what we're doing is more important than like going out into the world and feeding the hungry, because like we're sitting here being rabbis talking about this stuff. But this text is incredibly relevant to the dynamics at play between Chidi and Eleanor. Because Chidi starts off with this assumption that, like, I put up my whiteboard, I think through a moral problem, I teach, Eleanor these names, these questions, these concepts. And Eleanor also operates under that assumption, right? She says, teach me how to be a better person. Well, how am I going to do it? I'm going to put up the whiteboard, right? We're going to study together. And she does end up opening the books, right? But at the same time, you do have to bring, what you learn has to change you in some way. And so it could be the case, for example, with Eleanor, being forced to raise her hand by Chidi to clean up the neighborhood, that she was actually being forced into action a bit too soon, that she actually needed to do a little bit more study in order to get to that point where the idea of the action would actually be meaningful to her, for her to understand what it means to act, that action is against the selfishness that has been the foundation of like her, swallowing paper to prove a point. So, so what do you think? What does this text make you think about in relation to the show?
I so want this to be true. And I think that I love that they're sort of playing with us. I think, this is where I feel like Mike Schur is like talking directly to me. He's like, I'm going to show you, what it looks like and make fun of you with your books and your blackboard and, talking to people and having handouts about how to be better because that's what you think. And this, of course, is a TV show. It's going about it in kind of a related way, but sort of different. And, it got me to ask, like, are the things that I have learned actually, have they fundamentally changed the way I act? Like, is there something? And did it come from like a lecture and books and notes where he talks about, we're going to have papers and exams. This is going to be so great. And Eleanor's already like skeptical about that. So I will say, like, so I was trying to think of an example. I will say there's one thing for me. I when I decided to become a teacher, the first things I did before becoming a synagogue rabbi were kind of classroom teaching in Jewish schools. Some of them were what we call supplementary, after school or Sunday programs, and then in Jewish day schools. I had this idea, I think from something I read in maybe in the course of one of my early courses in college, maybe psychology, or maybe it was actually a moral philosophy course, about like the importance of education. And then I thought back on the teachers who had influenced me to think certain ways, and thought, oh, that's a really important thing to do. I'm not a great teacher of kids, or not yet. And I decided that that was really important, and so I would try to learn how to do that and be better at it. And so that, I think, is an example of not something I was doing bad that I changed, but something I oriented to, maybe. I don't know. How about you?
I love the way that you said the "not yet" there, right? That like you kind of dropped that bit of wisdom into this conversation. That the answer to the question is not yet. Always, like, Eleanor, am I a good person? Eleanor, am I a good person? Not yet, but I could be. And, in that sense, there's something so fundamentally American about her. And, the other thing that you got me thinking about there was my teacher, Rabbi Dr. Larry Hoffman, who was a professor of liturgy at my seminary, Hebrew Union College in New York. I once heard him say that a good sermon doesn't teach you anything that you didn't already know. It just gives you a way to think about it that helps you, better embody and internalize the lesson. And so I guess, one of the things that sort of opens up for me it's kind of unclear, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is it the case that Eleanor doesn't know what's right and what's moral? Or is it that she doesn't know how to do what's right and what's moral? Or what's going on there? Because, it's kind of like, listen, different cultures have different, understandings of what's moral. We can talk about Jonathan Haidt and his work on moral psychology. Maybe that'll be a part of a different conversation, because I think that's fascinating stuff to talk about. But, it's pretty clear that a lot of what Eleanor does is morally wrong to anyone with a smidgen of moral intuition, right? And so, but is she aware? Does she know? I don't know. What do you think? Does she know that what she's doing is wrong when she does it?
So I think it goes to the question that maybe the text you brought doesn't say explicitly about sort of different kinds of knowing, because obviously she feels when she has that last scene at night where she's thinking about the last thing, picking up the bartender, and it sort of comes together. She thinks about it, and then she goes out and does this cleaning up of the neighborhood. And so, she's been in a room with the blackboard and like some of the questions, but he hasn't started teaching her yet. And what you said before, like she's not ready to do the thinking. And so there's some combination, I think, of she wants to avoid going to the bad place and she feels bad. And this leads her to be ready to learn. I guess that's the answer to the question before. But I love what you said about the sermon, because it goes back to teshuvah, that it's like going back, like to something that presumably you know. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that that's also just part of the wisdom of, there's a great TED Talk called Atheism 2.0 by a philosopher named Alain de Botton. I'll pronounce his name as I believe it's pronounced in French, but I could be wrong.
Very good.
Yeah, and he talks about how, if you're thinking about next level atheism, what is it that atheism, if it wants to, make for a better world, can learn from the ways that religion has made for a better world? And one of the things that he talks about is the importance of marking time. And that's one of the things that religion does very successfully. And, as rabbis, we live on Jewish time. We live according to the holidays of the Jewish calendar. And every holiday brings with it a different idea that we encounter with regularity. And he makes the point that, like, religion teaches us that we can't expect to remember everything that's moral and good and true of any kind. Like think about how many times like I have to look up the restaurant down the street, right? Using Google Maps. Like, the same can be said of like, doing the right thing on a given occasion, that you need to circle those great truths again and again and again. And that also gets to your point about teshuvah, that it's in spite of the fact that, and I think that aligns also with the idea of the sermon, that you didn't, that what's true, but you just need to be reminded of it. You just need to hear it again and again and again and again and again, and until it becomes a part of, until it becomes truly embodied and truly a part of you and truly internalized.
And that's, I think, how, in that sense, Jewish study, whether it's you're like probing a text or just going each year through the Torah cycle, is different from just like studying something or reading something once. And maybe it's why The Good Place circles back so many times to similar questions and even ideas and builds on them. I was thinking about, it's back to your first question, that how does this work, is I had a moment watching this where when they're out doing the garbage cleanup, and it's one of those check-in points where Chidi's trying to decide like whether to help Eleanor. And he says, most great philosophers would say helping you is pointless. You can't try to be good when your motivations are corrupt. But Aristotle compares, being good to like learning the flute. And she's like, Aristotle, let's use that one. And like so one of my worries is that, study in this sense, Talmud or Torah, doesn't really, that would be one worry, that all this stuff that I do doesn't make a difference. The other is that, you got like some great philosophers, and here he says most of them say this isn't worth it, but here's one. So I think, okay, good, let's choose Aristotle, but then like that's just the beginning. Then we delve into that more. I think I've been reading, you mentioned Jonathan Haidt. I was thinking about Daniel Kahneman and all this stuff about how we think we're motivated by our thoughts, but that we're actually not, or not always conscious. And I think it's interesting, this episode, as I say, the relationship about like thinking plays a role in the process. And it's really causing me to think about my own process, and also what I hope to do when I'm teaching or around when somebody, right? I mean, Chidi wasn't offering a course and then trying to recruit people to take it, or sending out a bulletin to his synagogue, so to speak, and saying, I'm going to offer a course on moral philosophy. Somebody had to want to do it. And I don't know, have you ever had any time where you think that study has affected you, your life course, or helped you correct an action?
Why don't you share yours first, and then I'll sort of think about it as I go.
I was actually thinking about two things. I'm not sure that one's kind of ethical and one isn't. I'm coming up, actually this month may well be the 40th anniversary of the last cheeseburger, or bacon cheeseburger actually, that I ever ate. And I went to a Jewish camp, Camp Ramah, and I met these kids who they weren't like Orthodox in the way I had a stereotype of Orthodox. They were actually conservative. They sort of believed and looked like I did as a teenager, but they also all knew Hebrew fluently and kept kosher. And I just came back saying, kind of, I want to be like that. And I don't think it was for ethical reasons, but it now it affects everything I do when I eat. However, I did read Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, and that got me from an ethical point of view to stop eating certain kinds of meats, but to only, or I should say mostly, eat from certain kinds of sources. And that was definitely something I learned that got me thinking ethically, although I was, I think, primed from some other things. Like that was down a long road that had started somewhere earlier.
So what you just shared about food got me thinking, which is that I am very much a carnivore, and I love a good piece of meat as much as anyone. But in particular, what I've learned recently, and I would say that Ezra Klein's evangelism for veganism, and or at least some kind of vegetarianism, has inspired me, in particular around the issue of sustainability, environmentalism, to cut back on my carnivorous intake. And the other thing that I would say that I really appreciated about I listen to his podcast with a great deal of regularity, and so he talks about how you don't have to take a maximalist approach. Like it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can take it incrementally, and then you'll see where it leads. And so my wife and I decided that we took a secular New Year's resolution in January that we're not going to eat meat on weeknights. That we'll only save that for Shabbat and for the weekends. And so that's been something that we've done that has been that I think is a little bit more a little bit more moral, not judging the people who like to, eat their, their steaks and their chicken out there, but we definitely try and monitor that intake a little bit more.
So one of the things that I think about is it's almost easier to think about where study has led to action in relation. Our examples a lot are in relation to broader social issues. And I think what's really interesting in The Good Place is that they root it a lot in individual action. And one of my big questions about the show is how much they would talk about like the world, what we call tikkun olam, fixing the world. And I think there are going to be future things where we'll really explore that as the show goes on. But here it's very much about how she treats people who are like right around her. And I'm trying to think about, are there ways in which I got an idea about something I do or don't do, like in my person-to-person interactions, that maybe study has led to a change in me or gotten me to start thinking about how to change my habit.
I'll just share a piece of Torah that I think about a lot when I when I speak to people, which is the who is wise, a person who learns from everyone. That's Ben Zoma, also from rabbinic literature. And I think that sort of guides the way I'll have folks who say that you've like totally interrogated me when you sat down to talk to me, because I was like, yeah, I like to learn about people and learn about where you're coming from and learn about your stories. And so that's always a little voice I have, Ben Zoma's a little voice I always have humming in the back of my head saying, ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Another teacher that I had, Reverend Dr. Charles Howard, who's the university chaplain at Penn, or at least he was when I was a student there, said, used to say, turn judgment into curiosity, which I'm sure is like something that, it's a very common idea that's been articulated. And that's another piece that really guides the way I talk to people and interact with folks.
I think you and I are two people who certainly believe that Torah isn't just found in Jewish books or in the Bible or the Talmud also.
And I think that the other thing that I, before I ended up working at Central, I taught a lot of college students. And it's always interesting teaching Torah to college students because they approach it with the same interpretive principles that they do the other texts that they're encountering in their, regular course of academic study. And so they all want to like rip it apart and say like, it's a blah, 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 blah. So why is this different? And, what makes the sacred literature of the Jewish people different? And what I always encourage folks to do is to just entertain the possibility that the literature can transform you. Just entertain the possibility. And also, like, what does it mean to encounter a text that, the person who wrote it never knew, like, didn't know who you, obviously, but dreamed that you would one day be reading it? Like, what does it mean? And how does that change the way that you encounter that literature? Encounter the sacred text. And so those are, just from the perspective of like, what can learning do for us? What can learning do to us? How can it make us, how can it transform us? I think that those are a couple of lessons that I've taken away from my time as a teacher.
Boy, and you really knock me out, Dan, because you're making me think about these texts that describe the Torah almost as if it was a personal letter from God to each of us, or sometimes even as like a marriage contract or a will or something that was inscribed. And these midrashim, which we've talked about the Ten Commandments being uttered in the singular, in this whole group, as though to each of us in our own way. And we'll loop back to that another time. Wow. Well, we could talk about these things for hours, and I think the great thing about The Good Place is that we'll be able to loop back and build on this because we're just getting started in this process that Eleanor and then soon we'll learn the others are going through as well. Thank you, Dan, Rabbi Dan
All
Ross,
right, John,
for being here with me, and I hope you'll be a regular co-host.
I will.
And there it is for our second episode. Thank you for joining us. I hope we're earning some positive points in your algorithm. Check out tovgoodplace.com, T-O-V, good place, all one word. That's where you can see the texts we discussed and the Hebrew words we used, as well as links for deeper dives. Subscribe to Tov wherever you get your podcasts and give us a good rating. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @TovGoodPlace. And if you have ideas for how this can be more interesting or more fun, email me at tov@tovgoodplace.com. Once again, I'm John Spira-Savett, and you can follow me at RabbiJS3 or on my blog, rabbijohn.net. That's Jon. Thanks again, Rabbi Dan Ross, for joining me. Dan's on Instagram with his Judaism-themed workout videos at RAV_WOD. And check out his synagogue, centralsynagogue.org. Tune in next time as I'm joined by the always thoughtful and ever hilarious Rabbi Audrey Marcus Berkman. Thank you to my local Jewish place, Temple Beth Abraham in Nashua, New Hampshire, tbanashua.org. Come by if you're ever in our area, or join us on Zoom from anywhere. And thank you again for listening. To adapt Mark Evan Jackson's sign-off on the official Good Place podcast, go learn more about something good.
Bum, 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 bum.